Hello, I'm Micah Woods, Chief Scientist at the Asian Turfgrass Center. This is the ATC Double Cut, where I take a look at some of the content on the ATC website and talk about some turfgrass issues that I've written about and explain on this show why I think it is interesting to read about it, why I thought it was worth writing about, and give the double cut treatment by talking about it again. Today, I have a special guest. Andrew Thomson is joining me from Japan. Welcome, Andrew.
Good morning, Micah. Glad to
Now,
be here.
it is a pleasure to have you on the show. Andrew and I took a trip to some amazing golf courses in southwestern Japan, the courses in the Goto Islands, which I'd seen you'd taken a trip there. Once I, like, instantly after I'd seen those photos of the courses, which I'll show some of those, I realized, wow, that is something special. And fortunately, later that year, I think it was in 2018 when I went there with you, and I think you'd been there in early 2018, and that was some trip.
Yeah, well, nothing has changed since. I can tell you that Japan, like a lot of the world, has basically been frozen for 2 years, more than 2 years now. So I was unable to visit the islands during the pandemic because the islanders don't have a hospital, or at least on one of the islands. They have a very small clinic manned by a nurse, and they were terrified of being infected. So for 2 years, they were really isolated, but they were still playing golf.
Well, that yeah, that those courses are really cool, but before we talk about that, I had been watching the Open Championship, and I uh, immediately after Cam Smith won, and it was clear that he was the champion, I checked my Twitter feed, and I saw a tweet from you that was just spectacular. And let me read it. It said, "At 6:45 a.m. this morning, I scattered my father's ashes on the 18th green of the old course. 12 hours later, an Australian wins the Open. Cam Smith, champion golfer of the year, Champagne Golf." And I thought, before we talk about the golf in the Goto Islands and the types of playing conditions out there, could you tell me a little bit about that? Because that was a heck of a story.
Yeah, well, I didn't really intend to make it public, but my father won 5 Open Championships, four in the 1950s and one in the 1960s. And the second of them, in 1955, was on the old course, St Andrews. So he passed away in 2018, and about 6 months or so before he died, my mother told him that she would have a small portion of his ashes scattered on the old course. And he didn't object. He said, "Well, there's not much I can do about that, but don't make a big fuss about it." So as time passed, with the pandemic, we were unable to travel to Britain, and my mother lives in Melbourne, Australia. I live in Japan. So finally, sort of late last year, early this year, it became clear that we were going to be able to visit the Open Championship in St Andrews. So, okay, we can do what we promised. And then before the trip sort of took place, one of my close friends, Tony Rule, who's captain of Royal Melbourne Golf Club, he arranged to visit Royal Liverpool Golf Club, that's Hoylake, Royal Birkdale, and Royal Lytham. And those were the three courses, apart from St Andrews, where my father won his championship. So it seemed sort of logical in a way that I scatter a small portion of the ashes at each of the clubs, each of the courses where he won. So I did that in the week before the Open in Cheshire and Lancashire, and just very quietly played with the local captains and so forth of each club. And after the game, just quietly on the 18th hole with nobody looking, I scattered some ash. And at St Andrews, it was difficult because, of course, the course is closed to all but the competitors and caddies and officials. I couldn't just walk on. So I thought, well, I can't do this surreptitiously. After the Open, it sort of seemed silly. So I quietly asked for permission, and I was pleased that the Links Trust, which owns and controls the courses, including during the Open, said, well, yes, certainly. Very important. So the director of courses, Sandy Reid, very kindly escorted me to the 18th green there at about 6:45 on Sunday morning. And Cam Smith was horseback back, and McIlroy was looking in really very fine form. So I did what I did and sat back to watch the last day of the championship. And as the hours passed, and then Smith suddenly caught fire and caught up and passed McIlroy, and Cameron Young gave him a good run for his money, but Smith managed to fire a shot. And I was sort of sitting there thinking, gosh, what's happened? This is like an act of magic. So the what I'd done with Dad's ashes had got out. I mean, John Hopkins, the former Times correspondent, knew about it, and he was to write a piece, the Global Golf Post. So I thought, well, the golf world perhaps deserves to hear this astonishing coincidence. So I sent out the tweet, and a lot of people now know about it. So that's what happened. In 1955, he won in July. My father won in July, and later that year in October, he won again on the old course in the British match play. So he had a sort of special record there. And my name, Andrew Thomson, that's no coincidence either. I was named after sort of the town. But
Oh,
now,
wonderful. Wow, I did not know that. That is that is some story. What a trip to the UK to visit those open championship venues where your father had won. Had you been to those courses before on the West Coast?
no, the strange thing was that I had not. I'd always asked my father to take me back there, but he declined. He didn't want to cause a fuss, and he'd done what was necessary there as a young man, and he went back for anniversaries, 50th anniversaries of the championships he'd won, and he likes the clubs, but he just wouldn't go, and I never kind of got around to it. But the other thing I should add is that recently we discovered a set of Dunlop Maxfly irons and woods in his garage, and it looks pretty certain that they were the set that he used in 1958 to win at Lytham for the fourth time. So I took a half set of those clubs back, a 2 wood and a 2-4-6-8 iron, pitching wedge, sand wedge, and an old hickory putter. And I played each course with those clubs, with a modern ball, not a old 1.62 inch ball. But so it was a little extra. The Ashes was one thing, but to play those courses with 1950s golf clubs, that was very special too.
What is it? What is it like swinging those clubs and making contact with the ball?
Good question. It's the 2 wood off the tee. It was kind of scary. The shaft's still very good, and the original wound leather grips. It's fine. I managed to hit most of the fairways. The irons are sort of, how do you say, they're sort of crude. They don't quite have the feel of a modern, 2020 manufactured iron. And a 6 iron from the 50s goes only as far as an 8 iron now. You just can't get the distance. It's, I don't know, the shaft, the quality of the metal in the head, something.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
the lofts would be different too. I think
well,
the lofts
yeah,
have gotten stronger over the
yeah,
years.
maybe. So that was interesting. I mean, I did play with these clubs twice in Melbourne earlier this year on Royal Melbourne Golf Club West Course. So I sort of had a feel for the distance, but there was something sort of special about having a set of just 8 clubs and a little pencil bag, carrying it around on my shoulder. And of course, the sound of a persimmon wood when you hit a drive fairway shot with it. It was quite different, quite different. So it was a
That's
trip back in time. Really
oh,
was.
that's and speaking of a trip back in time, did you say hickory putter?
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
He used a hickory putter to win two opens. You can see it from the photographs on the final green. And we never knew which of the hickory putters he had at home was that one. So I took along a hickory putter that he used for 20 years, the last 2 decades of his life. And I didn't know if it was the one, but at Royal Lytham in the display case on the first floor of the clubhouse, there's various clubs that Open champions used. And when I walked into the clubhouse the night I got there, there was the hickory putter. So he donated it to
oh,
the club. It's there on display. And
oh
the next
wow.
day, when we played, we had lunch after with the club secretary and some others, and they very kindly took it out of the display cabinet, and we went down to the 18th green and had a putt with it on the green. We
Oh
didn't putt it
my.
with his but it had a really nice feel to it. So I can understand why Dad liked it.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that before, but hickory putters must have an incredible feel compared to a steel shafted putter. It,
But it depends a bit on the head, the shape of the head. If you've got a gooseneck, slightly offset hickory putter, yeah, I think you feel it more in your fingers and the palms of your hand when you strike the ball. But you've got to remember this is the mid 50s, even the late 50s, and this is 20 years after hickory putters went out. I mean, steel putters, I guess, came in about 1930, 31, 32. Why was a professional player still using a hickory putter 20 years later? Well, the answer is because he thought he could hold more putts with it, and he did.
yeah, I did not know that. I kind of well, I had thought that uh, the when steel shafts came into golf, I thought that went into irons and woods and putters, and everybody transitioned their entire set. So that's cool. He won two Open championships with the hickory putter, that or
Yeah,
hickory shafted putter.
yeah. And he told me, he often said that in those days the battle to win a championship was as much how you got hold of good clubs, not sort of how you hit them. Clubs varied in their quality, even coming out of the same factory. So a lot of players then would experiment with different drivers and, of course, putters. And there was much less uh, difference in the technique. I mean, the claw grip and the ankle, the various putting styles that players today seem to use. There was a lot less of it then, I think. Sam Snead was an exception. He varied his stance radically to try and adjust for the yips, but most of them had a fairly orthodox grip, and they just tried various putters. And Dad would sort of give away a putter after about a year's play; it just stopped working. So, but if you want to see the one that he used, it's there in the display case at Lytham.
Wow, that is that is something. Now, you used the phrase champagne golf, and I don't know that I've heard that before, and
Uh,
and I feel like maybe I should know what it means. But when I think of it, what it means, it's like, oh, okay, it's championship golf. You have champagne afterwards. It's played so well that one thinks of champagne as a fine drink. Um, does that is that the proper understanding of it, or can you tell me
well,
what that phrase means?
it means golf that's worth celebrating in some style. I mean, you wouldn't open a bottle of champagne if you came second or third in an Open Championship, but you would if you won. So
Okay.
it just came to mind like that.
Yeah, that's a nice phrase. Yeah, golf that's worth celebrating. Well, that was something. I've had the pleasure of meeting you in Japan a few times, and um, we've played golf together. We've socialized. You're in a beautiful part of Japan, Itoshima, which is on the island of Kyushu, near Fukuoka. It's in Fukuoka Prefecture. And for me to see that tweet from you, I was so glad to know that you'd had a chance to do that. So thank you for sharing that story with me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will. Well, let's see. I was going to mention there's this also, the bridge to the gods. While we're talking about Fukuoka, let me mention your book, and then we'll talk about the courses in the Goto Islands. You
Mm-hmm.
are the author of Bridge to the Gods: Tales from Kyushu, Memoirs of Life in Far South Japan. I read this book soon after it was published, and I really enjoyed it. It To me, it tells a story about life in Japan, which is just an amazing country. It tells a story that the average resident of Japan, the average foreign resident of Japan, won't get to see. The average tourist won't get to see or be aware of. And I would say even the average Japanese citizen, the average Japanese city dweller in the large cities of Nagoya and Tokyo, the Tokyo metropolitan area, Osaka, they won't get to see much of this countryside either. But you went around Kyushu, the southern island. First of all, you're living on a little peninsula near the ocean, in an old home that you've restored. But you took a motorcycle around. You drove around in a car or a motorcycle, visiting islands, chasing wild boars, inoshishi, eating food, and then you wrote about it in a very interesting way, and adding anecdotes. I just thought it was interesting. There's one chapter where you start off talking about the President's Cup in Korea, the international golf champion competition between the rest of the world team, Australia, Asia. I think no Europeans on the President's Cup team.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you talk about Shinto shrines and the crop and wild boars, and just it's amazing. And I found it quite enjoyable. So
Right.
you can get that book if you want to read more about Andrew's very interesting life and the interesting region of Kyushu.
Mm. Well, thank
I
you. Yeah, you can buy it on Amazon. The publisher will send it to you. But this part of Japan is the historical entry to the country for all foreign things. It's just opposite Korea, and the Chinese mainland is closer to my house than Tokyo is, so it's not far away. So everything from Chinese characters and culture and tea, and then eventually European culture, it came into Japan through Kyushu, the city of Nagasaki, or other parts of the coast here. So it has a particularly, I think, a noteworthy historical place in Japan's history. So I just went out and tried to find things there on the ground. I went to a battlefield that's the equivalent of Gettysburg here, where there was a big civil war after Japan decided to modernize, and the old samurai who resisted the modernization took on the government forces, the Union Army, if you like, with swords. And yet the Union Army, well, the Japanese government army, was armed with rifles that had been used in the US Civil War. After that finished, there was a surplus of weapons, and somebody figured out to sell them to the new Japanese government. So I went to that battlefield, things like that. I met some former Yakuza, organized crime guys, and who'd since gone straight after leaving prison, and heard about their lives and all sorts of things like that. So those places that I visited and wrote about, and most of the people, they're still there. So anyone would be kind enough to buy and read the book, you can come to Japan when we open up finally, and go around all those places, eat the same noodles that I did. But anyway, it's just something I put my heart into over a couple of years, and was published in 2018. So it's
Yes,
still quite fresh,
it is
but
still.
there probably wasn't enough golf in it.
No,
Maybe,
there is. I mean, you mentioned Kea Golf Club, dropping by to see our friend from Alabama, Andrew McDaniel, um,
yeah,
who is the golf course superintendent there, and you mentioned James Bond, and I don't. You must have mentioned just one more historical note: the kamikaze, uh,
yeah,
the famed defeating of the Mongolian invade. Was it Mongolian invaders?
yeah.
And
It
that
was.
happened at Hakata, didn't it?
Well, that's where the battles happened when the Mongol Empire forces tried to invade Japan at 800 years ago. Yeah, it was the foreshore of Fukuoka City in the bay where the big ships landed, and the samurai took them on and managed to keep them away for a couple of days. So the Mongols retreated about 50 miles away to another bay to sort of regroup and have another go. And they anchored their ships around some small, rather rocky islands in this bay, and in came a typhoon and smashed the ships to pieces. And that was the end of the invasion. So the myth was that the typhoon had been sent by the gods to destroy the invader. So it worked that time, but it didn't work in 1945. But there are a couple of museums in Kyushu to the what's called the Tokotai, or the kamikaze pilots. They're very moving places to visit. Very, I don't know. There's two of them, one near Fukuoka and one down near Kagoshima. So you can go visit them. You don't have to be embarrassed as a foreigner. The people that run the museums are quite happy to show you all the exhibits, and so you learn about how the Japanese military deteriorated to the point where they had to sacrifice 19, 18, 19-year-old boys to try and stop the Allied forces around Okinawa. It didn't work.
No, no, that was a very sad time and a terrible time, and um, yeah, the war had the war continued, the Americans or the Allies would have made landings around Miyazaki, I believe, which is on the south eastern part of Kyushu
Yeah.
Island. So there's
Mm.
there's going back 800 years.
Mm.
There's that kamikaze. Kami means God, and kaze means wind in Japanese, so it's translated usually as divine wind. So that's the original meaning of kamikaze, was from 800 years ago when the divine wind
Mm.
saved the country from invasion, and the
Mm.
idea was that there was going to be this. Uh, I don't know. The kamikaze the second time is more a Western
Yeah.
usage. It's not the word that Japanese use to describe
No,
what
no, they
happened with
call
those young pilots.
it. Yeah, they call it Special Attack Squadron Tokotai. Um, but when you go down to Andrew McDaniel's maintenance facility at Kea Golf Club, and there's all these young guys there working on the crew, keeping the turf in good shape. Some of them are 18, 19-year-old. They're essentially the same, young men that were forced into it largely in 1945. So, and a lot of the fishermen around the little harbour where I live, just sort of young Japanese guys, and they were the same as 2 generations ago, enlisted and fought, and then go back 800 years, there would have been samurai like that too.
Hmm.
So those echoes of history are still here, and it's interesting. Last week in St Andrews, if you want to stand somewhere and feel the echoes of history, listen to them and absorb them about golf, well, St Andrews is the best place to do that. Some of the other golf clubs in Scotland and England have a very rich history and it's sort of palpable, but nowhere more than the old Grey Tomb, that's for sure.
That's right. It's often called the home of golf, and when you're there, you certainly feel that.
Hmm. Yeah,
Now,
yeah. So, go
so,
ahead.
yeah, Japan, golf is very popular in Japan. There are a lot of golf courses around the country, and there are some golf courses that are basically not even on maps. There's a few, and Japanese people don't even know that they exist. Somehow you discovered, or not.
Hmm.
There's very few people that know about these courses. Somehow you discovered them. I'm going to bring up on my screen. Um, I'll share my screen and show a blog post that I did about this, which I'll put a direct link to in the description of this video, or in the in the notes to the podcast version if you're listening to this. These are the courses in the Goto Islands. And how did you come to discover that they exist?
Well, in Japan, the biggest selling golf magazine is called Golf Digest. Golf Digest Japan. And the deputy editor, or former editor, now sort of consultant editor, Furukawa-san, he was born in that area on the mainland in the city of Sasebo, which is home to the American part of the American naval fleet here. And so he knew about these courses on two islands. If you look on Google Map and you look for the Goto Islands, Goto, you see a chain of islands offshore from Nagasaki, and you go up to the top, and the top two islands are the ones where these homemade golf courses exist on the edge of the cliffs. On one of them, Ukushima, the northernmost island, there's still about a half a dozen Wagyu cattle kind of grazing between, the fairways. So the local people on one island, I think it was Ukushima first, they built their own course about 30 years ago. And they just literally mowed fairways and kind of cut very crude greens on this grassland that exists along the top of the cliffs. And right on the edge of the East China Sea, there you can see the ocean from most of the holes. And they started playing, and they don't have a clubhouse, but over the years, the population of the island's about 2,000 people. That's all. There was always about 20 or 25 men and some women who wanted to play golf. So they organised an informal golf club, and they have competitions every month. And if you win a competition, you might get a bottle of dishwashing liquid or some toilet paper. Like, this is really good. I won dishwashing liquid at once. So Furukawa-san, the editor, he sent me out there 2015 or 16 to do a story with a cameraman. And I went out with hickory clubs, and I found these gems. I should add, there's on the neighboring island, the residents there built a 5-hole course as opposed to Okushima's 9-hole course. And so the two islands have these crude courses, and they're perfectly playable. In fact, the turf on them, I think, is essentially the same as turf was 100, 120 years ago in Scotland, and maybe
I
in the US. You tell me, Michael. You have an
well,
idea of that?
I thought it was very interesting because when I'm playing golf, I'm often looking down. Although on these golf courses at Ukushima and Ojika, the views are so spectacular that I was distracted from the grass, and I looked out and enjoyed the landscape a bit. But yes, I'm looking down at the grass, looking at the playing conditions, and I recall you noted you. I think you mentioned that you thought that these conditions would have been uh, similar to what all the golf courses in the world would have been pre World War I, which would be which
Yeah.
certainly seems about right. I thought that was a very good insight, and it's interesting. Those courses are, of course, they're maintained, but they're not maintained by turfgrass professionals. They're maintained by volunteers, by the members, and
Mm.
they're not maintained daily. They're maintained in advance of a club
Yeah.
event, aren't they?
Yeah. They during the warmer months, of course, the grass is going to grow a lot quicker, so they have to cut more often. And they do it on a roster. Who's got time off? They're fishermen and farmers and local electricians and whatever. So they rotate their roster and they just go and cut it. And what you should add is that this grass is wild. It's natural, what we call noshiba. The fairways and the greens are the same grass. I bought both clubs a roller, plastic thing you fill up with water to roll their greens. And that brought about some improvement, because before that, the greens were very bumpy. There's a couple of bunkers on one course, but they don't cut the rough. They haven't got time. So the rough has never been cut. So your ball leaves the fairway. In most cases, it's gone. So
I
that produces a special kind of golfer.
Yeah, it's spectacular, and you have to hit across the ocean and over cliffs, and then you also have to avoid the rough, and it is quite reminiscent of well, it's not reminiscent of something that I have not experienced, but it reminds me, or brings to mind, that this must have been what golf was like 120 years ago, or something like that. Because, yeah, the maintenance level is such that it creates a course that's very playable. It
Hmm.
still seems fair. I played with hickory clubs that you shared with me for those
Mhm.
rounds that we played there.
Yeah.
And even playing with hickory clubs, playing on rough terrain, rough turf, it still seemed fair. And if one hit a good shot, it was still rewarded. Um,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
it's very much, it's golf. It's the same game.
yeah, it's the essence of the game. You go back to the late Victorian era in Britain, and yeah, people were playing like that at the same time in the US, where the early courses were built. They didn't. I'm sure they didn't sort of stand there and say, "Gee, this fairway is really poor." Maybe in extreme cases, if the ball was sitting up on the wild grass on the fairway, you had to worry about what club you're going to hit, a cleek or a mashie. And once on the greens, you had to ram the ball a bit harder across turf that's not cut fine for a green like now. But you were still playing against your opponents, and you still had to win. So everybody was on the same level playing field, as the point of phrase. So when I play there, when I get out there in the competitions and that, I'm out there to beat the fisherman Watanabe or the electrician Ueda or whoever else. We're trying to win. And maybe a week after playing there, I might go to a Kea Golf Club, or of course Tokyo or Hirono Golf Club, and play there. And I sort of miss the crudity of the turf in the Goto Islands. So if there are among your viewers and your admirers, Micah, people who they're just tired of life, but they're desperate for another golf experience that they'll never get elsewhere, well, you better come to Kyushu, to Sasebo, and get the ferry, because the courses are still there and the cattle are still there on Ukushima.
But yeah, that's
Nothing else. There are some other courses around the islands of Japan that are not perhaps quite as simple, but are not what you call a well maintained, modern golf course. And they're on some interesting islands. So you could probably find at least 6 or maybe 8 of them around the place if you had the time to visit. I'm going to try and do that before I'm called to another place. And in fact, we made our first television program about these golf courses in March this year, broadcast in early June. Myself and a retired lady golf professional, Moromizato Shinobu, and I. So we're going to try and make a few more such programs.
that that is good advice, and that is exciting to know that you have that television program in the works, which hopefully will get produced and you can shoot those episodes and go explore some of those other locations.
Hmm.
And I would certainly when I can travel to Japan again, I would like to go visit some of those places with you. I've traveled over more more of Japan than most people because in my work, many of the golf courses that I've gone to visit, because of land availability, the golf many of the golf courses that were built after the 1960s were built in rural areas. So I've been to Shimane Prefecture and just out in the mountains of Tochigi or in Fukushima or various places far from Sapporo
Yeah.
in the northern part of Japan. And in so doing, I've been to the southernmost course in Japan, which
Mm.
is in the it's not on Ishigaki Island. It's on oh I disremember the
Yeah.
name right now, but it's on an island in between Ishigaki and Iriomote Island. So you can go there. You're on the southernmost golf course in
Yes.
Japan. I've been on the easternmost golf course in Japan, which is in Hokkaido. And speaking of islands, and another one, this is a course that a lot of people will be familiar with. Kawana. You've been to the world famous Fuji course at Kawana,
Yeah.
which is in Shizuoka Prefecture on the Izu Peninsula. And if you look out from the golf course, you'll see islands out there in the Pacific Ocean. And in
Yeah.
fact,
Itoshima. Yeah.
and yes, and the other at Kawana, there's 36 holes. The world famous course that C.H. Allison designed is the Fuji course, and the original course there's an older course there that is spectacular in its own right, and that is called the Oshima course, which is named after I presume that island that's out there.
Yeah.
Well,
Island.
if you also get on a ferry and you shoot out to Izu Oshima Island, you will find a golf course on spectacular land that is not played very often. I visited there some years ago, and I didn't play the course because I often visit golf courses and look at the turf and take some pictures and study what's growing and what the problems are and what the solutions might be, and don't play. But that's the type of course that I would like to play. It was a 9-hole course, and I recall they had very few rounds. And some of these courses that are on these low population islands, or the southernmost course in Japan, or the easternmost course in Japan, that reach the extreme boundaries of the country and away from the big population centers, they have 4,000 rounds a year, 6,000 rounds a year, 12,000 rounds a year. What I would consider relatively low rounds, because the typical golf course in Japan will do 35, 45, 55,000 rounds per year. They tend to be pretty busy if they're near a big population center.
Mm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that golf course at Nemuro on Hokkaido, the easternmost point golf course in Japan. I played that course in the same week, 2016, I think, as I played the northernmost course at Wakanai. And the turf in Siberia, the turf in Hokkaido, is very interesting because it's a Siberian type climate, I guess you'd say. And the feel on the fairways when you walk and when you hit a ball is quite different from a lot of the courses on Honshu. Or the further up Honshu Island, the main island of Japan, the further up you go from Tokyo, again, I found the climate and the turf around Morioka, for example, was distinctly different. Um,
Yeah, that's
you
That's right.
know,
Well, you mentioned Morioka, and I've been to a course there, Nambu Fuji, which was designed by your father or your
yes,
father's firm,
yeah,
and that that's kind of that's the southernmost part of the region of Japan at which you have to use cool season grass for the most part. So b-
yeah,
Sendai is kind of the cutoff for me as far
uh-huh,
as how far north you can go with
yeah,
the warm season grasses, the types of grass that crunch underfoot, that have that stiff feel, and
mhm,
that's the Noshiba, Zoysia
Yeah.
japonica, or Kori, Zoysia matrella, that are the turfs that you'll find on 90% of the courses
Mm,
in Japan. But you get
mm,
up to Sendai and up above that, which Morioka is, I think,
mm.
a couple hundred kilometers north of that line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get cool season tees, cool season fairways,
Mm,
cool season rough, and
nice.
just some excellent bent
Mm.
grass greens generally.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. 2 weeks ago in Cheshire, at Hoylake, Birkdale, and Lytham, I mean, those courses are about 40 minutes, 30, 40 minutes drive from each other. And I was interested to find how they differed. I mean, they're links courses, they're all right, pretty much right next to the coast, the Irish Sea coast. But the topography of each of them differed, and likewise, I thought the fairway quality, the feel of the fairways was a little different on each one. Certainly, the scale of the dunes. Hoylake's very flat, except for the holes along right along the coast. Um, Whereas Birkdale is huge. The scale of the dunes within the course there is huge. If you have a look at Jordan Spieth's big slice on the 13th, was it, in the Open Championship there, not so long ago, where he took a drop and managed to, uh, I think, bogey the hole, and then he overtook Matt Kuchar. You can see the scale of the dunes there. And finally, then you go another 40 minutes or so north to Lancashire, where you find Royal Lytham. And no, it's something in between the two. And then I think again head north to the old course, and again the landscape is uh, flattish, but within each hole there can be, apart from the first and the 18th, I guess, there are all sorts of movement in the soil. So that was quite an interesting experience for me, because watching the YouTube videos produced by the RNA and so forth of previous Open Championships, you don't quite get a feel for what the turf's like on those open rotor courses, so how it sort of differs. Anyway,
So
that was my experience.
so when you're playing it, you might make a different move at the ball, or clip the ball a little bit differently if you're going to hit the proper shot or the shot that's called for at the time based on the turf conditions that differ
Yeah,
from course to course.
I'm not that good that I can adjust uh, my sort of strike of the ball so precisely. It was more, I'll hit the same shot pretty much on different fairways, different courses, but the feel of it, the turf's thinner on most of the holes. I think at Hoylake and Lytham than it was at Birkdale, and it's somehow maybe more like the old course turf, except the 18th and the first, which are sort of greener. But it's summer in Britain, so things are going to be different in winter, certainly in different seasons. But if one thing about Japan and its golf is, I think it's a little too uniform. I mean, the course care is generally pretty good, but there's I think, a disappointing sense of uniformity about how green surrounds, should be prepared. When I've talked to golf course managers and so forth and explained about trying to provide areas around the green where the ball will roll, where you can putt from, say, 20 meters out from the green, they look at me as if, this is sort of lunacy. Why would we putt from 20 meters away from the green? Well, because you cut the turf so fine that you can putt. And no, we want to have our turf, it has to be long around green so one can chip. Well,
Yeah,
what?
it's
Um,
the,
anyway,
there's a unique look to some courses in Japan that you might recognize, that's very target golf oriented, not because of bunkers or lakes or other things. There's golf courses on big expanses of grass, but it's made to be target golf by the tall rough. And
hmm,
and have you ever seen those courses that will have the tee and then the fairway? But then the interesting thing for me is that little narrow strip of approach that's cut low
uh-huh,
between fairway. It's
yeah,
almost like a walking path that goes from
yeah,
fairway up to the green.
yeah.
And and it's a little strip of fairway mown with a triplex with a 3-reel mower, and you can't hit a ball through that. It's just simply a walking path that goes from the fairway up to the green through the rough. That's a very unique phenomenon to Japan, and you won't see now. Not every Japanese course has that, but some do, and I'm sure that they weren't originally like that because there wasn't that equipment to cut it that way. So somewhere in the 1970s or the 1980s, it was determined in Japan by someone, probably at a famous tournament, that that was a nice look and a nice target golf, and it would reward good shots or something. And a lot of courses copied that to where now you'll still see that occasionally on televised tournaments. And certainly you'll see that if you go visit some courses. And it's just like, oh, that's not quite the way that the maintenance would be ideal. Certainly for someone like you who plays at courses such as Royal Melbourne, on when you're in Australia, I believe that you play there occasionally, and that's not the type of playing surface that would be considered ideal.
No. It's but look, Japan is a prisoner of its own orthodoxies. I mean, the Japanese saying the nail that sticks out will always be hammered in. So, as a course superintendent or committee chairman or something at a club, if you said, no, let's mow the surrounds and get some sort of Scottish style golf going here, you'd be the subject of ferocious criticism. And there's not many Japanese who are brave enough to endure that. So the orthodoxy becomes sort of set in stone. It's very hard to dislodge that from people's minds. Even in courses that are literally owned by one man or one woman. No, we have to listen to the members. If there's no hanamichi, no, as you say, a little pathway up through rough to a green, people complain, where's the hanamichi? Well, sorry, we're going to play it like it is in Scotland or maybe Shinnecock Hills, other places like that, Royal Melbourne. No, this would be the emperor would be upset. We can't do this. So it's going to be a battle. But if that's the way they want it, well, in a sense, they have, I think, less variety in the risks of golf here, and therefore, I think less pleasure. But they don't know it. So,
No, but are you still the chairman or the president of the Japan Hickory Golf Society?
Yeah, we have our annual general meeting tomorrow. I'm trying to step down, but they won't let me. So I think I'll be elected chairman again tomorrow. Yeah.
Is that growing in membership? Are there more and more people interested in that? Or
Yeah, we add about 10% a year to our sort of membership. That's not a lot of people, but we another 20, 25 people a year. It's growing. It's very strong in Nagoya for some reason.
in Nagoya? Wow, yeah. Japan has a big golf industry, so we're talking about some of the courses that people won't typically see. If you're a foreigner that coming to Japan to play the famous, highly ranked courses like Kasumi Gaseki, Tokyo Golf Club, Hirono, Naruo,
Yeah.
Kawana, those types of courses, they generally will have a pretty traditional maintenance in a more they're Japanese, but they will have wider areas
Mm,
and mown a little bit more thoughtfully around the greens and so on. Tokyo
that's,
Golf Club, of course, is famous for having 2 greens, but their
mm,
2 green system at Tokyo Golf Club is a bit different than the 2 green system that you'd see on the typical Japanese golf course. But the a typical Japanese golf course would be something like Ube 72, which is
mm,
just across the bridge or through the tunnel and
yeah,
over in Yamaguchi Prefecture
mm,
from where you are.
yeah.
It was interesting. I was looking at the tournaments that Peter Thomson had won in Japan, and apparently he played a 13 or 14 hole
Mm,
playoff, which is the
yeah.
longest playoff ever well, the longest sudden death playoff in professional golf or something like that. And I looked at it, and that was at Ube 72.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there were the other two players were his good friends. They were both Australian too. There were 3 Australians in a playoff in a tournament that was, I think, the Pepsi Ube Championship. Graham Marsh, Brian Jones, and my father, and they just couldn't edge each other for 14 holes. Anyway, finally, Dad managed to birdie a hole or something, and he prevailed. But yeah, it's not that far from here.
And that's a course that I've been to that you won't see a lot of foreigners at, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a 72 hole complex
Mm-hmm.
with I think they have four clubhouses. It's that's a
Right.
very industrial region of Japan. A lot of steel, perhaps some chemicals, but I think a lot of steel works. It's a very industrial area. uh, it seems like working class now, but
Mm-hmm.
there's enough executives and uh, managerial level people that would go play golf that they could develop this rather large golf operation, the Ube 72 Club.
Mm-hmm.
And that course would have the traditional type of maintenance. They have 72 holes, four courses. One of the courses has a single green, and three of the courses have the two green system. And at those courses, when they have the two green system, they tend to be two rather small greens that just kind of sit side by side, which is different than what you'd see at Tokyo Golf Club, where the holes almost, the greens could be 50, 60, 70, 80 yards apart at Tokyo Golf Club, and those greens would be similar in
Mm-hmm.
size, in that either one either one of the holes that you would be playing on the particular day would be a legitimate
Mm-hmm. Well,
green,
there's
a course that you're hitting to.
yeah, they're different. I mean, it makes the whole quite different in most cases. The angle in from the approach shot or the tee shot and par three. Um, so yeah, you've got one club there with a one course with two greens. So there's there's quite distinct variety in what they enjoy there at Tokyo Golf Club. But as you say, other two green systems, one winter, one summer green, whatever, they're right next to each other. So it doesn't make much difference. Anyway, that's one of the unique things about Japan, and that's golf. And you and I have gone further by trying to find golf courses in remote locations to make the golf more interesting, perhaps. And my message to your viewers would be, you can do that as a foreigner here. You can travel. You always find someone who'll help, or there's enough English around. You get in a hire car, drive on the same side of the road as Britain or Australia, but you can get around and play. And you'll find little local hotels or inns to stay in, and like really good food in these remote places. And people are not suspicious. They're a little shy of foreign visitors, but there's always someone around who speak a bit of English or explain things. So that's the joy of, what do we call it, remote golf in Japan.
Yeah, it's and some of these courses are just, it's spectacular scenery, and you just feel it's really a special and enjoyable kind of golf. So I'm looking forward to playing a round or two again with you sometime. I'll bring my hickory clubs, and we'll go play some of those classic courses around Kita.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they were around Kitakyushu. There's three that we owe ourselves the occasion to play there, most certainly. And Unzen, you went up to Unzen to look at the grass, didn't you?
Yeah, I
Japan's
that now
second.
that's a that golf course is on the side of a volcano at
Mhm.
a famous, very famous hot spring resort that was really famous before World War II. And
Mm.
people used to, it was a stop on the boat trip between Kobe and Shanghai. And
Mm.
people would stop there and then go up to the high elevation on the side of the volcano and play golf.
Mm.
And during the war, they used some of the fairways, a couple of the flatter fairways they used as runways for training
Mm.
for pilots, and grew some
Mm.
potatoes on the fairways and stuff. But it's back to being a golf course now, and it's very cool, very cool. And that's another course that not a lot of people get a chance to visit.
Yeah, it's about an hour's drive from the city of Nagasaki, and lovely hot springs sort of village there with plenty of accommodation. Yeah, it's an elevated course built in about 1904, I think, by a group of Japanese and foreign, mostly British merchants who were there in Nagasaki. And it's a public course. You can play it today. There's a problem on a couple of holes of some crows that come and steal your ball. So they give you a cap gun, kind of a pistol to take. So you walk down the fairway with this cap gun and fire a few shots to scare the crows away. And then you drive and rush down to the fairway before the crows can come back and take your ball. It's a problem. But
Yeah.
they won't give you a 12 gauge, to really destroy these crows.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Mm.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much. It is really enjoyable to talk with you about the types of turf and golf courses and stories of what you've seen around the world and what you continue to see around the world. I am looking forward to seeing you in person again and playing golf, and maybe have you back on the show sometime if you're willing to talk about some of these interesting things.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to appear again. Perhaps not too soon, but there's some well-informed people in Melbourne you might talk to sometime about how they fared hosting the President's Cup in recent years and some of the other things about golf in Australia. So they're among the Australian sort of golf enthusiasts, they're certainly better informed than I am. But I remain here in Japan and look forward to welcoming you here again. See you on the first tee.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for sharing those stories with me. And I will see you next time.
So
All right, everybody. That was Andrew Thompson. Again, you can. I'm going to recommend his book, Bridge to the Gods: Tales from Kyushu. He that is a book that I really enjoyed reading. It has a bit of golf stories in it, um, but as he said, it's not a huge amount of golf, but it's some very interesting stories about a very interesting part of Japan from somebody who is an excellent storyteller. So that is this show. I could talk with Andrew for another hour, but I won't. I will save it for the next time, and I will sign off from Yantakao, Thailand for ATC. I am Micah Woods. Thanks for listening.